What is up, everybody? RJ Starsvik here, proud owner of the Motor Stardom brand, former owner of the NASCAR Report, or what was called the NASCAR Report, on Instagram. If anybody is tuning in, obviously these are kind of on my side accounts here, kind of just running a test of what a show could possibly look like. That hopefully we will be launching over the off season and obviously for next year as well. But it's going to be a fun show, and we decided to do this today because there is, quite frankly, a lot to talk about in the NASCAR world. Some good, some bad. Usually, a lot of the times, it seems like this year, 75% of the time, we have something to talk about. It is unfortunately for negative reasons. So we are going to bring in my good buddy Chris here to the stream. And we're going to talk about it for the next 30 to 40 minutes here. And what I was explaining is kind of going to be a little bit of a test episode for what something could possibly look like next season. All prototypes here. But first, Chris, introduce yourself and let everybody know how you doing on this fine Monday afternoon.
Hello. Chris Gollin here, coming to you from beautiful Flagler Beach, Florida. I'm a local news reporter around here, and of course an avid NASCAR fan, getting slowly but surely into the world of NASCAR media. I'm still kind of reeling from what we saw last night, still processing. I think NASCAR is still processing too, as we'll sort of get into, but yeah, just I'm excited to talk about it. There's a lot to unpack, probably more than any other race this season so far. And then, a lot to look forward to Phoenix next week.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we are going to go over here. And, not to take away, we won't talk about this majority of the show, obviously, but just to start off with it, big performance by Ryan Blaney going out there and winning the race at Martinsville, picking up, I believe, 9 spots over that last run at a track, or a kind of track where passing is rare these days. With this next gen car, it's been hard to get around people, dirty air, with how equal the cars are, but he made it look easy driving up through the field, wasn't afraid to use the bumper. He ends up getting the win, but unfortunately that valiant performance wasn't the big talk of Sunday. It unfortunately was some controversy that happened there late in the race, and that was our good buddy Christopher Bell getting disqualified from the race. Not from the race, but his last lap being disqualified because of riding the wall. He was ruled to be riding the wall. Now, there was a whole bunch of stuff that went on here, Chris. There were so many things going on at the same time. These final laps, we've seen this at Martinsville before. We got 2 stories here, and this is how I kind of break it down, how I broke it down last night. You got the 24 car. He's 1 point above the cut line. He really needs to hold his position to make it in, but he is getting past. Austin Cindric gets by him. Denny Hamlin gets by him. It seems like, although Christopher Bell can't really pick up spots a lap down, it seems like Byron's going to lose enough to get out, but Chevrolet has a plan. And whether you say they did or didn't, looking back at radio communication, it seems like there was a plan to be able to help that 24 of Byron. The number 3 and the number 1 car kind of almost incensed. I'm sure that wasn't exactly the plan, but they basically made a roadblock for the number 24 car. I know Brad Keselowski was back there and some other cars as well trying to get by, and they just quite frankly could not. Byron hangs on to the spot. On the flip side, Christopher Bell, he's a lap down. He can't really pass anybody, but the next car that goes a lap down is Bubba Wallace. They're updating him on the radio, the situation. Hey, by the way, 20 cars back is the number 20 car. And all of a sudden the 23 car, Bubba Wallace says, I think I got a flat tire, and he starts falling way off the pace coming in the final corner. He's letting the 20 car go by. He is in all essence letting the 20 car go by him for that final spot. Christopher Bell, though, doesn't really know that because he can't. They couldn't have just flat out told him that on the radio. So he knows what spot he needs to get, but he doesn't know if he's getting it or not. Now, I think if the team radioed to Bell, hey, the 23 car's got a flat tire, he would probably been like, oh, okay, yeah, flat tire. Oh, okay. And then just drive on by him. But Bell just sends it into that final corner. by the 23 of Bubba Wallace. And we can look at it here on the screen. He goes in, not thinking he's going to get the spot, just freaking slide jobs him, gets into the wall, doesn't know if he's getting crossed back over or not. So his first instinct as a race car driver is just to drive that damn thing right off the outside wall, get to the start finish line, and he gets the spot. And then it took about 30 minutes, I believe it was, Chris, in all its totality to decide who was getting to the next round. NASCAR decides that William Byron is going to advance because they are disqualifying Christopher Bell's last lap. Now, there's going to be a lot for us to unpack here. There's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of opinions all over, but those have just been the facts. How did you take in what we saw that night and that crazy finish? And how are you still unpacking it as we go into a day where there's a court date for something totally separate? We have to prepare for a championship race in just 6 days. And then we got all this going on where I don't think the Final Four is going to be changed, but there could be some money passed around here with some fines maybe come Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think the reason why they made sure they hammered out the Christopher Bell situation right after the race is, as opposed to sitting there and combing through everyone who they may or may not take action against, is because Christopher Bell was the only potential Final Four driver who I think you can take action against in that moment for his actions. Christopher Bell, obviously, whether or not he violated what we'll call the Chastain rule, because that is what it is.
The Hail Melon.
The Hail Melon. Whether or not he did that, that's going to affect the Final Four. William Byron, regardless of the alleged team communications within Chevrolet or even the team communications within Toyota, I don't think in any interpretation of it you can accuse William Byron of any wrongdoing. So he, as another potential Final Four driver, he's not on the block to get penalized. So that kind of really shows where their mindset was, with probably a million different things they have to look over. But they correctly identified that the ruling on Christopher Bell was going to be what determined whether or not it was him or William who made it to the Final Four.
Yeah. And do you see the similarities? We're looking at Ross Chastain's Hail Melon in 2022, Christopher Bell's half Hail Melon. Watermelon's out of season right now. I just had some today. Wasn't that great. So, that's kind of what that bottom one looks like. But, to me, obviously both are very different, right? We know that Ross Chastain went into that corner saying, I'm just going to floor it and hit the wall. Christopher Bell probably got halfway into the corner and was like, well, you know what? Maybe this won't be a penalty, but I'm going to gun it. Racer's instinct. I'm just going to keep the throttle down. I know these cars just will skirt right off the wall. I should be fine. But, I think where NASCAR wins the deal here, no matter what, is everybody goes back to, okay, what is the ruling? And if this was just a ball and strike call by NASCAR, then there's allowed to be an appeal, right? Joe Gibbs comes out, of the hauler yesterday, walking back to his garage area saying, well, we cannot protest this because this is a safety violation. And that is what Elton Sawyer said. He says this ruling, because they ruled this kind of thing a safety violation, it is just like an uncontrolled tire. It's just like too many men over the box. It is something that is called during the race and cannot be protested. Yes, it was called, 30 minutes after the maneuver happened, right? We're not going to see too many men over the wall called 30 minutes after, it does happen. But by them making this a safety violation 2 years ago, that is why Joe Gibbs Racing cannot do anything about it, because they can say, well, this was ruled a safety violation because you can't just appeal it. This is final. So that's one reason why I believe this Final Four will not change. And the second reason is because I don't know if you remember, Chris, I've been thinking about this a lot back in 2022 at the Charlotte Roval, where Stewart Haas Racing was penalized for race manipulation. I don't remember if you remember exactly what happened, where it was Cole Custer kind of letting off and then Chase Briscoe flying by him so he can get some final spots over the cut line. which ended up eliminating Kyle Larson in that race. Stewart Haas Racing was fined $200,000, I believe, was the total in the number in its totality to the team for race manipulation because there was radio chatter telling Cole Custer the situation. Cole lets off, blatantly. Chase Briscoe goes by. But you know what they didn't do after that race was adjust the playoff field. They didn't add an extra driver. They didn't, Jeff Gordon wasn't in the playoffs. Kyle Larson didn't get added to the playoffs, and Chase Briscoe didn't get kicked out. But there was a hefty fine. So that's what leads me to believe, based on precedent, whether you like it or not, and we can, I'll have my own opinions about that. But what's one thing that we always want to lie back on is precedent. So NASCAR didn't change the playoff field then, but they did give a hefty fine. So what's my prediction? I think Bubba Wallace, if anything, would get a fine. I think Austin Dillon, Ross Chastain teams maybe get a fine. But I don't see this being something where they come out Wednesday and say, oh, well, we have just ruled that, Christopher Bell, or William Byron is out of the playoff four and this guy's in. I don't see that happening. 2024 has shown you never know, but I think in a championship week where I think media day is probably tomorrow, I don't think that's something where that can happen. I see a lot of heavy paydays coming towards some teams here midweek.
Yeah, I could maybe see a crew chief suspension as well, because depending on the communications, depending on who in each individual case is saying this, that's going to be irrelevant. Like I know Bubba in his case is the one who said, "Hey, I think I have a tire going down." I haven't heard the radio on Ross's car, and then I believe it was Austin Dillon's where they said that it was the "Hey, that was a message from Chevy" comment. That was Austin Dillon. Yeah. So in that case, I think the one communicating it is going to be important to them, and in determining who may or may not have action. And NASCAR did confirm today, like say, they are investigating those 3 cars. It definitely is reminiscent of, obviously, Spingate is the poster child for this sort of thing, where you had Clint Boyer and the itchy arm, where he intentionally spun out, and that resulted in Martin Truex taking a playoff spot, chase spot at the time from Jeff Gordon, leading the 13th driver, blah, blah, blah. This definitely seems similar to that. I think bringing out a caution is a little more proactive than just simply sandbagging a little bit, but it's certainly not the same thing. It is the same thing. And even in the case of Spingate, it's not as if they had absolute, irrefutable, completely ironclad proof that Clint Boyer and MWR had done that, but they exercise common sense in the radio communication. And I think you have easily as much evidence in the radios in this case as you did then. So do I think anyone's going to get added to the Final Four? No, because at the end of the day, I think it's pretty clear cut that Christopher Bell did violate that rule. The more times I saw it, the more obvious it looked. So I don't know that if he had maybe not done that and just missed it by a point, you never know. This might be a different conversation. But what Bell's move actually reminded me of, even more than the Hail Melon, is the Carl Edwards move in 2008 against Jimmy Johnson. Because what Chris did was he just sent it as hard into the turn as he possibly could. And you see him make the bottom until like midway through. And then because of all that momentum, he washes up the track into the wall and hugs it, which is exactly what Carl did at Kansas. Only at Martinsville, because the wall is so much tighter around you, you're probably going to stay on it longer. So that made it resemble the Chastain move a lot more. But yeah, I mean, I don't, like say, I don't anticipate anything more than, like you said, a fine and possibly crew chief suspensions.
Yeah.
For what happened on Chevy and Toyota's side, it's certainly, I mean, they can do that, and you could very well argue they should. I would argue they should. Um, we're definitely at a point where the prevailing sentiment from NASCAR fans is that this practice goes on pretty regularly. Not always for a playoff spot, not always for something that severe. But I mean, you look back at Spingate, you look back at Team Penske and front row in that very same race. You look back at Trevor Bayne being told to separate from Jeff Gordon in the tandem in 2011. You look at, and then just a couple months ago or so at Talladega when I can't remember if it just looked like it or if they actually have the communication. You had Kyle Larson backing off of Brad Keselowski's bumper coming to the line at Talladega. This kind of seems to be the MO. Anytime it's not been for a playoff spot, it's tended to be ignored in the officiating. But with it being this severe, I would think and I would hope this would bring a renewed scrutiny to the role that team orders play in racing, both for race win situations and for playoff spots.
Yeah, for sure. And I think race manipulation is something that, don't know when it became a term officially, I guess, in NASCAR as a penalty, but I think it's certainly something where if we want to talk about the two word, saying team orders is something that has always been a thing. You go back to restrictor plate races when they were called restrictor plate races, there's always team orders. There's always, okay, we're going to help this guy. Okay. I think helping another person, I think, is different. I think one thing that now where the people draw back is laying off for somebody or maybe going up to somebody. Oh, I could give my 100% and push this person, but I'm not, I'm going to back off, in the case of the 3 and the 1 not passing the 24, or in the case of the 24 or the 23, just laying back an entire track so the 20 can get by them. I think there's a difference between teamwork, and team orders, because I saw somebody tweet in the replies, and I don't know if they were just baiting or not, but they were mentioning, instances where we've seen this before and there haven't been penalties, which they have. But I think their first example was Ryan Blaney pushing Joey Logano at Las Vegas. And to me, that doesn't fall under this category because, in my opinion, you're just pushing a teammate. So towards the end of that Las Vegas race, Joey Logano's fighting for fuel, right? Was that
this year?
Yeah, like 3 weeks back at Las Vegas, the beginning of this round. Joey Logano was big fuel mileage to end the race, and Christopher Bell is making his way through the field. Joey Logano gets a little bit of a boost because he starts saving a little bit more in the straightaways, but Ryan Blaney's pushing him on the backstretch because Ryan Blaney's like freaking a billion laps down, in trouble, but he's out there helping his teammate. To me, I have no problem with that. I actually think that's genius because, he's out there. You're just helping a teammate. It's the same as pushing someone on a super speedway. I have no problem with that at all. I actually, when I was watching it, I'm like, oh, this is genius. I mean, Joey, and who's the team that shows up in the playoffs? This was talked about yesterday, and I have said this for 4 to 5 years. Penske is a team that has, like, historically an okay start to the season. They usually have a pretty rough summer stretch, although this year that was the only time they got their wins was the summer stretch. But they always come to the playoffs and go from a team where you're like, yeah, round of 12 exit to 2 Final Four contenders. And I think if Austin Cindric doesn't get caught up in a Talladega wreck, which he probably almost could have won that race, and a Kansas wreck where he was running top 10, I honestly would have had Austin Cindric in my pick to the round of 8 because he went out and finished top 5 at the Roval. I think he would have made it. So Penske comes out and they just are incredible. But nonetheless, back to race manipulation and what we were talking about. I think it's just going to be interesting to see how they crack down on this. I think, kind of alluding to what you were saying, you were using examples back before the playoffs even existed. I think this is something that's always been a thing. I mean, hypothetically, you could have a situation where somebody is, back when the chase was happening. Yeah, 2013, right? You go back to a time where somebody's points away from the chase and, this happens. You could have a situation where we had a full long Winston Cup Series points format. and you got two guys coming down to the final race fighting for the championship, and then you see this type of race manipulation. I don't think it's certainly been elevated with the playoffs now that we have 3 races a year in the playoffs where people are eliminated. I certainly think it's been elevated now, but it's not like it just began existing because of the playoffs. Team orders, race manipulation has always been a thing, but I certainly think the playoffs have just oversaturated it because now you have more cutoff races. You have more races where you are on the verge of being eliminated. And teams are going to fight for all that they can to get it, especially at a track like Martinsville, where you can just boot somebody out of the way. You can ride the wall. You can kind of slow down, and you can block the track. It's not like we're racing at Kansas or anything. Martinsville is probably one of the easiest tracks to manipulate a finish at because you can just put on a roadblock, or slow down and lose a lap in seconds. But race manipulation's always been a thing. Like we were talking about, I'm interested to see what NASCAR does. I think it'll be a fine, but I don't think it'll be anything more. But what I have seen from NASCAR, certainly this year, they're not afraid to fine people. That's for sure. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. got fined $75,000 for expressing his emotions, which I also think is a load of BS. But NASCAR has shown this year they're not afraid to fine people and run their pockets in a year where people are already losing money because of the bundles of crashes that we have, and don't even get us started on the charter agreement. They're finding people left and right. So I could certainly see some fines come out this week. What about you? What is your prediction for? We don't know nowadays whether it could be Tuesday or Wednesday where penalties are announced. I mean, for crying out loud, it could be announced tonight at 6 p.m. But what is your prediction for if any penalties come out? You think it just fines?
Fines, and I think the Chevy crew chiefs get suspended. I do not think the 23. I don't think it would Booty Barker. I don't think Barker will get suspended.
It'd be funny if it was the spotters though, because then that'd be the second time Brandon Benesh, the three spotters in jail this year after Richmond for his communications on the radio, and then he's the same exact guy is on the radio at Martinsville saying, "Hey, remember,
and for RCR,
literally at the beginning of the race, hey, remember, we got to help Hendrick today." And then at the end, hey, remember the situation? He's 1 point back. Hey, does that one car, they know the deal? Yeah, we're telling him up on the spotters bench. Like, yeah, he's got to stop talking.
For RCR, they're probably going to lose a tire changer too.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah, well, that's already said and done. They're on vacation over there for the 8 car.
Oh my gosh.
So it's been a jail year.
I don't think Barker will get suspended solely because Bubba is the one that actually said it. And my view on it is I think you got to at least catch someone kind of in the act of saying something. Maybe you don't. Maybe they do it because I think you're a fool if you think that Bubba, if he did do that intentionally, that he did so without his crew chief's knowledge. That's pretty ludicrous. But I also think they tend to only really want to take action if they hear someone participating. I mean, I think it's ridiculous to think that the 1 and the 3 did that without the 24 team's knowledge. Personally, like Rick Hendrick, it's not supposed to be this way, but Rick Hendrick is absolutely the head guy in the Chevy race team.
The tribal chief. He's the head of the table.
Yeah, I recognize I don't think anything was on Byron's radio. Not that I've seen or heard that was suspicious.
Yeah,
but
it was coming from above.
Knowing what we know, it would surprise me if Rick Hendrick or the crew chief of the 24 didn't have some awareness that was going to be happening.
Oh yeah, no, and kind of like what I was mentioning, the thing that sticks out to me is before the race. I mean, sitting on the grid. This is something that you could have told Austin Dillon on pit road, like voice to voice, never would have been caught. I saw something saying Spotter's got to come up with some key signal for this, and you do. I mean, if this is a plan going into the race, you got to have something at least, where you just come over the radio and say Jello, and then that's a situation. I get point situations. I don't think you can penalize somebody for saying, hey, by the way, just letting you know this is the point situation, because maybe driver
Yeah.
wants to be updated on that. Hey, maybe I should be, watch out for these playoff guys today. They got a bigger fight than us, but to come on the radio before the race and say, hey, make sure we help out those Hendrick guys today. And then at the end of the race, you're like, hey, they know the deal. Hey, make sure, then you're just kind of frying yourself right there. When that is something that you literally could have just talked about before the race, say, hey, this is going to be the situation. And if we want to go even further, here's a code word. And all he could have said was, hey, yeah, he battled in 24. He's in a playoff battle right now. Looks like he's 1 point above.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
all you got to say. And me as a driver, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to make the personal decision whether to pass him or not. And NASCAR can't really, do anything about that if it's just something I'm doing in my own head compared to Bubba Wallace, falling off the pace. That's something totally different. I heard they tore down his car and they're going to look into seeing if there actually was a mechanical failure, but who knows? Bubba Wallace learned, what was it? How many years ago was that? Do you remember the incident where he spun himself, I think, out for a caution and NASCAR wasn't going to do anything? But then in the interview, he was like, yeah, I spun myself out. And then NASCAR was like, bingo, we're finding you.
Probably like 21, 22.
Yeah, I think it was right around then. And then you remember, I don't know, when Denny Hamlin ran into Ross Chastain at Phoenix. I think it was at the beginning of last year. Or at the end of 2022 when he ran into Ross and then, they were just like, okay, racing incident. And then he went on his podcast and was like, hell yeah, I wrecked Ross.
No, that was
and
20.
They were like, oh, what'd you say? And they were like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that was
now that you admitted it.
That was the year Denny and Ross were at each other's throats all year, which was then, because I remember the Hail Melon, one of the elements of that kind of gets left out is that him knocking Denny out was after all.
That was the most poetic of the whole.
Yeah. So it was 22. I know based off of that. I also remember Kyle Busch spun himself out in the Truck Series once. And if I recall, like, you could literally see the gloves turning the wheel on television. It was so blatant. And he's not even in that series for points, and he's doing that. And I don't think he had anything happen to him there. So it's pretty fruit baskets, I'm sure, were being sent to teams very, very early in this past week. And you know what, like, I don't want not to be over dramatic, not to take it into a whole like soliloquy or anything, but when you hear about fans, I hear so often fans talk about how, I was interested until like 2000 blank and I just don't like the way the sport's going anymore. Think about what you just brought up. You have the number 3 team telling their driver to race with consideration for the plight of the number 24 team. Tell that to a fan of the 90s.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, it really shows how different competition is now versus the quote unquote golden age. And that's a pretty good, I think, look at the kind of thing that I think contributes to fans falling off is stuff like this, because I honestly don't think there's any fan out there that just roots like that team orders like this. They're like, yeah, this is making the sport better. This is making competition better. No one. None of the team order, race manipulation, any of it, whatever you want to call it. None of those incidents have ever been celebrated. None of them have ever been have been popular. They are a pretty clear detriment to the racing product. And I understand that these OEMs are putting a lot of money into the sport, and they want to have room to operate to ensure their own success. And I know that the amount of money they're pumping into NASCAR is probably a big deterrent from NASCAR taking really, truly meaningful action against the practice. And like you said, you never want to take it so far that it's not just teammates helping each other. But I really, like, this is one where you can't really kick this one under the rug. This is pretty bad, this is NASCAR fans did not enjoy the show last night of any driver. No drivers fans were happy except Ryan Blaney's, and I think you have to not only respond to the teams that are guilty in this, that you find to be guilty, but I think you have to address the system that led to something like this happening. Because I think I can speak for every NASCAR fan when I say I don't ever want to see something like that again.
Oh yeah, and I something that I just thought of is I want to see one person's bracket. If there's one person out there that picked this Final Four, I want to see it. I want to see proof of when you made it, because in my opinion, this is something that nobody could have predicted in the beginning rounds. I mean, you have the top three in regular season points. Not non-playoff standings, what people, what has been compiled over there on Racing Reference, just points, acquired throughout the year, not in the Final Four. And that being, I believe, it should be Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Christopher Bell, all not in the Final Four.
Did Reddick fall all the way out? Because he's the regular season champion. Did he?
I think as far as like non-playoff points, I think he's like fourth or fifth.
Oh, wow.
I look at, just because I think it's really, he's fifth place, and I think it really lies on just the bad playoffs he's had. He was my championship pick going into the playoffs on ESPN radio. I made that pick. I said I think it's Tyler Reddick's year, even with all this lawsuit, blamma jamma. Well, that happened after the playoffs, but even with everything going on, I said that those were going to be the guys to get the job done. But you got non-playoff standings. William Byron has the fourth most points gained this year. Tyler Reddick is the fifth. Ryan Blaney has the sixth, and Joey Logano right behind them, of course, the 14th most points acquired this season, right behind Ross Chastain and Chris Buescher and Bubba Wallace, all three drivers that unfortunately did not qualify for the playoffs. So I want to bring this tweet up. Well, I did bring it up, but we can just talk about it for a second. What are your thoughts on this, Chris? Obviously, you can read behind the lines here and what this tweet means. He's not talking about two guys that aren't wearing a suit, with the tie. He's not talking about two guys that aren't dressed up for a formal occasion. No, he is talking about the bow tie, which is the description for the Chevrolet logo. And he is saying that because they are with Toyota, they did not get the benefit of the doubt. And that is what he is saying. So what are your thoughts? Stirring the pot.
That's, I think, a pot meet kettle situation, because we're really, really looking like Bubba Wallace was doing the exact same thing for you. And come on, Toyota literally is under the exact same scrutiny as Chevrolet right now. The only innocent party in the context of this race, Ford. If you're sitting here as a Ford team, maybe you can make that joke. But I think when you have the 23 car mysteriously blowing a tire and the in-car camera not showing any of the telltale signs of blowing a tire, and all of a sudden, at the exact right moment for the other Toyota to get the spot that he needs, I don't know if you can be making that joke necessarily. I think, I'm not saying they're wrong that Chevrolet was up to some funny business and is very, very often up to funny business, but I'm saying maybe you're not the ones that should be saying that right now. Not after that. Not after doing something that is virtually identical. So that's my take on it.
Hey, big shout out to the Fords for not being in any controversy here. You got to give a big shout out to the Blue Ovals for not only, coming into, the end of the regular season and being able to make something happen, right? Not just doing that, right? They get Harrison Burton in the playoffs. They get Chase Briscoe in the playoffs. They get Austin Cindric in the playoffs. And then you add on to that Brad Kay and obviously Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney. All of a sudden, all these Fords are in the playoffs in a year where it was just Chevy and Toyota. And I was, on the edge of this when I've been talking about it on the radios. It's like these Fords, yes, Hendrick Motorsports and JGR are the two best teams in NASCAR right now. But you know what? Talk to me again in October, September, when we start coming down to the wire here. And all of a sudden, these Penske cars start coming out, and obviously, right, it wasn't the playoffs Brad Keselowski wanted. And you know that. It wasn't Chris Buescher didn't qualify. He didn't make it. Not the playoffs RFK would have wanted. Like I said, I think Austin Cindric could have gotten farther, but just have to give that quick round of applause for the Blue Ovals, because you know what? You can say all that you want about who deserves to get there. They play the system. They got there. They had two pretty much must-win drivers. And what do? They both won. And now you look at a Final Four where the odds are in their favor. They have 50% of the drivers that are in the Final Four right now. Every driver in the round of 8 that they had a chance to get into the Final Four, they made it. With great strategy. I think Penske is blessed with great crew chiefs. I think Paul Wolf being on top of the box for the 22 is great. And I think all of the teams, they're just always on point here at the end of this year. And then you look at the drivers that are eliminated and weren't able to make it, right? Here's the graphic for the championship 4 this year. Oh, wait, no, these are the drivers that don't get to compete for the championship 4. And I saw something and I totally agree. If you would have shown me, this whole graphic right here, I would have just looked at it and been like, wow, what a Final Four this would be. You have Kyle Larson, 6 wins on the season, is typically almost unbeatable at almost every track you go to, always has a chance to win. Denny Hamlin, when the team gets it right, when they unload right, you can say the same thing. As long as they get it right with the car, Denny Hamlin could go win everywhere. Christopher Bell and Chase Elliott, both those quiet, consistent drivers this season, didn't go out there and get every single win imaginable, especially Chase Elliott, obviously only getting 1 win, but Chase Elliott, second most points gained of a driver this year. Christopher Bell right behind him in third, 2 very fast cars week in and week out. But we're talking about 4 drivers that are not even going to get a chance at Phoenix to compete for a title. Christopher Bell, especially after making 2 straight Final Fours. We know the heartbreak a few years back with Kyle Larson being eliminated early. Denny Hamlin, the heartbreak as well, again, doesn't even make a Final Four. And every year where it's like, is this Denny Hamlin's year? What do you make of these 4 cars being eliminated here? Drivers that if I looked at this graphic, I would have been like, yeah, that's my Final Four. And honestly, if I go back and look at my bracket, replacing Tyler Reddick with one of these guys, this is probably the Final Four that I would have had. What are your thoughts?
I'm definitely a purist in that if I had my way, I would love every year for the 4 drivers who earn the most points to be the ones in the Final Four. Because I want the champion ultimately, if possible, to be the driver who truly was the best that season, because that tends to be how we think of a champion, and not the one who climbed the NASCAR playoff format mountain. It's so in that sense, it is a little disappointing that Kyle Larson isn't in there. He's, I think, the most egregious, if that's the right word, miss it. The one that really feels like he should be in there. When you consider that Joey Logano, no offense to them, who has less points this season than 3 non-playoff drivers, that he is in the Final Four. Now, given, like, say, everyone has the same system, everyone has the same opportunity to execute when they needed. But I really would have liked to see, by that, coming from that mindset, at least Larson, if not, probably also Bell, and maybe Denny Hamlin also making the Final Four, just because I think those have been some of the real, true, honest, best drivers this season. From a biased fandom perspective, are those the ones I wanted to see? No, but that it is something where it's like, if you're a purist and you're still sounding the horn of wanting to go back to the old point system every year, this was not a Final Four you're probably enjoying, and this final cut is probably not one you're going to be very happy with.
Yeah, not at all. And I look at this, this Final Four here as it, all 4 drivers. You can make cases for all 4 that they, should be in that Final Four, should be in that championship, right? They have a chance to win the championship. We know Joey Logano is a 2-time champion. He's always going to have a chance once he gets this far into the playoffs. But it is certainly, if I were to look back at all the Final Fours per year, the seasons that all of these drivers have, I think certainly the best Final Four that we had was back in It was 2018, right? 2018. We had the big three, is what you called it: Kyle Busch, Martin Truex, Kevin Harvick, that all went out there and won crazy races. But guess who won the championship? Joey Logano. That,
Yep.
in my opinion, I think was the best Final Four in my eyes, or at least one of the best. Last year was fun, I believe. Youngest Final Four that we had, with all the young drivers in the sport competing for a championship last year. I think that was cool to kind of see the next generation in there. But this year, and this is a full rant that I'll save for the end of this show here coming up. But I do think the playoffs are timed out. I think that we are in an era where racing, each race in itself, I think is interesting enough, to where we don't need this whole playoff system, at least the way it is. But nonetheless, I never want to take away from any driver that is qualified for the Final Four, because sometimes you can't totally hate the player. Sometimes it is the player's fault, but you got to look at the game as well. And Joey Logano is a driver that plays the game clearly the right way all throughout the playoffs and in even years as well, right? This was a storyline this year going into the playoffs. Joey Logano in even years is like one of the most unbeatable drivers ever. And what do you know? He makes it to the Final Four here in 2024 in even year. But let's break down these four contenders here really quick.
I do, really quickly, before we get off the topic of the playoffs, I do want to point out something that I just saw come out. So as far as just the necessity of the format in general, you saw quite a few notable people in the NASCAR world yesterday. Brad Keselowski, Toby Christie, were saying they're kind of getting sick of it. Brad said this should be the straw that breaks the camel's back for this format. And so I just saw on Denny Hamlin's Actions Detrimental podcast, he asked Mike Ford of NASCAR Communications for his thoughts on the format getting slammed on social media. And do you want to know what he said?
Let me hear it.
He said, quote, "It's bots, not real people." Well, I have to say, whoever is designing these bots, that they're able to go out there and win the 2012 Sprint Cup Championship, that they're able to sustain a very popular grassroots racing news website, hats off. They're the people making these bots.
And he was saying he's calling the people bots, the people that don't like the format.
Yes. And which, like, say, it's obviously not. It's Brad Keselowski and Toby Christie saying this, and a lot of other notable people. I think Mark Martin joined in on this too. And that's, to me, that's like, you don't have to agree with it if you're NASCAR. You don't have. I know they're not going to, knock their own playoff format after this. You can't do that, but that seems like a really bad response. That rubs me the wrong way, and I'm willing to come out and say that. And I will say this as a passionate bot that is just, like, say, my circuits and gears have me tuned into NASCAR every single week. I think last night was a pretty good indication that the playoff format is not cutting it for me. But I'm just a bot, so what do I know?
Well, I guess that kind of does segue into what I wanted to talk about here, and you can see the graphic that I'm about to put up here. So I've had a lot of thoughts, and everything. This hasn't, just so people know. I mean, I've briefly talked about it when I'm on my radio show. I've said it on Twitter here and there. More so this year. This race at Martinsville didn't really set anything over the edge for me. It didn't change my opinion, and really just kind of just proves more points of what I'm saying right. And so my big thing is here, and I've said this I really started emphasizing this more towards the middle of this year as we learn more about where NASCAR is as a sport, what the racing is like, all the parity with all these different winners. There's been a lot of learning. And I think what I've learned over time, right? So we introduced the playoffs back in 2014, and I will be honest, when I was a fan of it, I was also much younger. I didn't have, as much knowledge as of the history of the sport as I do now. But, when it was introduced, we were at a time, not even 2014, but really once we got to 2016, 17, 18, 19, especially 18, 19, 20. NASCAR was at a point where we needed something. We needed a spark. The sport was, we had some of the same tracks. People were always complaining about the cookie cutter tracks back in the day, right? We have too many Texases and Vegases and Kansas. I mean, we go there twice a year. What are we doing? Right? We wanted more interesting tracks. We wanted more interesting racing. You go back to 18, 19, 20 with the 550 package. I mean, that was absolutely horrid. 2021 as well. That 550 low, super low horsepower, gigantic, big ass spoilers, Dale Jr. calls it, on the back of the car. That package stunk. So when the racing stunk, when there was no parity, we also had terrible teams all throughout the field, right? We had our good teams, and then you know what? We had a second half of bad teams. Rick Ware Racing, who are doing tremendous now, doing wonderful things. This isn't a knock on them. But when they started out and they stunk and they were just there to be there, they were running 4 race cars. Premium Motorsports had 2 to 3 cars. MBM Motorsports, Spire Motorsports was just starting up. They stunk. We had a bunch of field that was there to stink it up. And so we'd go to a track every week and you'd only have 10 to 15 cars that you really thought had a chance of winning that race
Yeah,
if things were to go awry. Yeah, if that. So in those years, I think the playoffs were appreciated, given more of a chance, especially by myself, because we needed a spark. And you know what? When the racing wasn't great, the playoffs did give us something where the schedule wasn't so diverse to the point where every round did seem somewhat normal. Um, but now we fast forward to today, where we've learned enough about the next gen race car. We probably haven't learned enough about it. We're still figuring things out. But we've learned enough about today's racing and where NASCAR is at that I don't believe we don't need the playoffs anymore. You can, people make the argument and say, well, I didn't like it when it was introduced in 2014. I didn't like it then. I didn't like it now. Totally get that. Totally separate arguments here. But my point is here for both sides, for NASCAR, Elton Sawyer's point of view, talking about, and then those guys talking about the bots, right? And us sitting here not liking it. Whether you like it or not, NASCAR we don't need it anymore. The schedule is so diverse. When I look at the playoffs this year and I look at the first 2 rounds, and we're deciding seasons based on 3 races, which one is a super speedway, one is a road course, and the other one is something else. Those were the first 2 rounds of this year. When you're looking at 2 races that basically seem unpredictable, that is not the right way to crown a champion. And you're looking at a series where, when I mentioned parity, there's so many different winners week in and week out. You don't know who's going to be competitive because, number one, we don't have really practice anymore. We have a wacky qualifying situation, and people are still learning this race car, and the preparation's also different. The parity is high. The teams are so much better. Where now you could go into a race weekend before we hit the ground for practice and qualifying, and there are 25 to 30 cars that could possibly just come out of nowhere and win the damn race. You never know nowadays. And so I think when we have a series where every race is important, you could cancel out the playoffs. Every race is important. Every race has had some sort of unpredictability, because what was NASCAR wanting when they introduced the playoffs? They wanted unpredictability, big moments, game 7 moments. We've had a season with records of overtime restarts. That is unpredictability. That is game 7 type of moments right there. We have had a series, introducing stages obviously back in the day helps it, but when you have these late race restarts, all this craziness we've seen all season, you could have ended the season at race 26 and crowned Tyler Reddick the champion of the series, without even just having knowledge of the playoffs, and people would have been like, okay, that was a crazy year. You know what? Tyler Reddick and Kyle Larson fought to the end. They were the 2 best cars all season long. Congratulations. But my big thing is just races are just too unpredictable now. And then to now you get in the playoffs, and that's why we have a Final Four like we do this year. Because quite frankly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you unloaded with at Kansas in May. That literally has no effect on your chase for the championship. And I think it is interesting that all this is going on while this lawsuit is going on? What is Denny Hamlin, Front Row Motorsports, the team's problem with this legal issue that's going on right now? Because they want to invest in the sport, the long-term health of the sport. Teams are investing a lot of money to make this happen. Charters are super expensive. Cars are expensive. Sponsorship is on a decline. Teams are scrambling to find money. And if they did, number one, don't see it worth it in the charter deal to invest long term, but then they look at the flip side and say, okay, are we really having fun anymore in this? Are we getting a long term investment back? We're spending, NASCAR wants me to agree to this charter deal that I don't agree with just to come out here for a 36 race season where really the first 25 possibly could not even matter for my season. And so I think teams are also taking that into effect, and drivers as well, where you see the frustration on Martin Truex Jr. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. You saw him after Watkins Glen. He's ready to get out of here. He's going to come back and run a few races just because you want to scratch that itch of racing. But as far as committing yourself to a full season anymore, people just don't there's not the itch, I feel like, to do it anymore. You don't have practice. You have this weird qualifying format. Teams aren't allowed to test anymore. I saw a tweet from somebody that used to work in the industry. You got drivers that, we look at the youth of NASCAR nowadays, and people are just doing whatever the heck they want because nobody can test anymore. Nobody can practice. You're just going out there winging it, and there's a lack of consequences. And so it's hard to fathom that we really got into the last 3 years that having limited practice being a regular for a car that NASCAR basically designed on a computer, and simulated an iRacing and then ran in single car tests and was like, oh yeah, we got ourselves one here. And we have seen the most changes to a race car, I think, in the last 3 years, and the most changes to a rule book during the season, I think, ever. I mean, you look at the beginning of the year, the rules that were set when the Daytona 500, when you dropped the green flag there, to like rules and different tires and different car parts, and I mean, a whole different qualifying format to rules we have now. It's insane the amount of change we've had this year, and having to. I want to explain this to all my non-NASCAR friends and every NASCAR diehard fan. Chris, I'm sure you've experienced this all the time. You've had a point where you've been explaining NASCAR to people that don't know it. You wish it could be simpler at times, right? Like you wish that, you know, I had a buddy at Homestead. He came out and it was his first ever NASCAR race, and he was in the stands and he was like, NASCAR, the Cup Series took the track for qualifying, and he was like, what the hell's going on? This isn't what I watched yesterday. And I was like, okay, so let me explain it to you. Blah, 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 blah. And he's just like, well, why the hell would they do that? I was like, you're asking me, buddy. And I'm the one that works in this industry. So I just, that was mainly the rant that's always been in my head. It comes back to the center where NASCAR doesn't need the playoffs. I don't think NASCAR ever needed the next gen car either. I've seen somebody, make a lot of tweets about, oh, the next gen car saved NASCAR and this and that. I do not agree, because what NASCAR needed before was, number one, marketing. We needed to get the sport out there. We got a lot of stars invested in the sport. 2311 racing was started before the next gen car, by the way. Trackhouse was started before the next gen car, by the way. And so I think this was a sport that, with time, and with the new era of the world right now, with how important marketing is and how people are coming back into entertainment, right? NASCAR is pretty hot right now. Despite all the controversy, we're a hot sport. There are people interested. Their Xfinity numbers are, I think, as high as they've ever been before. Shout out to the Xfinity series, the one series where we get some true stock car racing going on in there. The WWE, as far as entertainment, is as high as it's been in recent years. I think we've seen a big resurgence on people tuning into entertainment sports. That's basically my rant, Chris. We don't need the playoffs anymore. You can argue whether you wanted it or not, but in my opinion, I like to look at both sides always. I like to try and find a way to meet in the middle, and my meet in the middle is 3 races each round to decide a champion is a terrible way to go in today's NASCAR. And I think looking at it that way should be a good thing. I'm not slamming the sport. I'm saying the sport is at a point where each race is great. we have so many great teams in the sport right now, so many people investing in that we don't need the playoffs because the playoffs was only invented because they felt like we needed it to get extra viewership. I don't think we need it. My solution, 10 race chase. I think that was a great meet in the middle kind of thing. You build the chase field. I make it 16. I don't care. We can make it 16. We can go back down to 12. Doesn't matter to me. I think bringing the chase back would be great, but I think we don't need the playoffs anymore. And that's not a slam on NASCAR. That means we're in a great spot. We have a lot of great teams. We should not be deciding a championship like this. I shall be peaceful now. Cheers.
That was a beautiful rant.
I'm out of water, but
hats off. And I'm going to keep it brief. And I really think the playoffs are something. It's simulating the appeal of the playoffs in a stick and ball sport. And the reason why you need to have playoffs in any of these sorts of sports is because were you to just award the championship to the team with the best record, you still have variables like whose schedule was stronger, who played harder or easier teams. The very, very likely outcome that multiple teams have the same record. It makes absolute sense to have playoffs in the big four American sports. You don't have this in NASCAR. In NASCAR, every single week, every single team competes against one another. The strength of schedule is not a factor. You don't have, if you have, say, two cars that have the same number of wins, there's a million other, just points. Points is a pretty all-encompassing way of determining which, who's actually better. Like in points, I get how it looked after the Ryan Newman-Matt Kenseth situation in 2003, but like when Ryan Newman wasn't winning, he wasn't really running up front. That's the reality of it. It might not be pretty. Maybe you want the guy with the most wins to be the champion, so maybe make wins worth a few more points. That's the solution to that, is have more bonus points attached to a win. Then you can achieve that outcome. This playoffs, it's trying to recreate moments that people loved in NASCAR, like stuff like the pass in the grass, stuff like Ricky Craven and Kurt Busch, these iconic highlights. It is an artificial way, an artificial meaning it was constructed.
Yeah.
I don't even say artificial is a bad thing in this case, but that literally is what it is. It was constructed by the sanctioning body in an attempt to have more moments like this, like you said, Game 7 moments. And every now and then, you get great things like the Hail Melon. That was awesome. But now you baked your cake with fake ingredients last night, and guess what? It tasted horrible. It created something. You would never have a situation like that without this structure driving it. It is another indicator that playoffs in a sport like this, where everyone competes against everyone, every single event, is trying to ram a square peg into a round hole. It does not fit. It doesn't work. I'm not saying they're not getting the outcomes they were hoping it would give them. I don't doubt that they're happy with it based on the metrics that are important to NASCAR. But it's gonna continue to produce moments like this. And if you need any more evidence that this is not working, that it's not natural, it's not supposed to be how this is done, look at how many times they've changed the playoffs since it debuted. Look at how many patches they've put on it. When it started out, everyone's points were flattened out in 2014 at every round. It was, or am I wrong? Am I misremembering?
Playoff points were introduced, after way.
Yeah, and I still I know what a playoff point is, but I don't know if I can teach a non-NASCAR fan what a playoff point is.
It's challenging.
They've had to add and add and add over and over again. They've had to make the regular season winner have this huge bonus to simulate, what's that? a full season championship. They've had to emphasize full season performance with yet another add on to the playoffs when you could absolutely accomplish this with complete purity, with nothing being forced, with it never coming to a circus like last night, by simply having the full season format. And like you said, the format is not the reason we had so many great moments this season. There's so many overtime restarts, so many great bits of racing. The incredible 3-wide finish. There's like what, 2 or 3 closest finishes in history happening this year. It has nothing to do with the playoffs. The playoffs did not help that happen. If the racing is good, if you give an aero package that is conducive to good racing, you're going to get good racing. And my last point that I make, because I did say I'd be shorter than this, my last point that I will make on that is that notice how the sport reached peak popularity without the playoffs. Clearly, it is able to be that big without having to build this elaborate thing to try and force certain developments.
So that was a great rant as well. I got a light bulb in my head because I got a notification on Twitter. So I sent out a tweet today. Usually the negative tweets blow up, obviously. So I've 16,000 people have seen it, I guess 397 likes. I put out a recap for 2024 because this has been on my mind since last night. I said, let's recap 2024. And there's a bunch of things I missed. I said, changes mid-year to implement soft tires, $75,000 fine for throwing a punch, the Coke 600 delay, Chicago cut short once again, the Brickyard 400 finish screw up, right, where Ryan Preece sat on the backstretch for 10 years.
Oh my God.
The Austin Dillon Richmond incident, flips everywhere, more change to the race car that we didn't know, I guess, a lawsuit on NASCAR, and now the Martinsville playoff incident. And there were a lot of additions in here as well that I forgot, probably because I had a character limit. But somebody said, don't forget Hamlin engine and controversial restart at the first Richmond. Yes, I remember that. The Clash rain out and running it on Saturday.
I forgot about
Larson not double. That goes into Coke 600. Record 5 overtimes at Nashville. I don't put that, that just happened. The biggest wreck we've ever seen at Talladega. And so this is, this was meant to be kind of just an unfortunate events list. Not all of them being NASCAR's fault, like Chicago cut short again. You can place blame wherever, but most of these are, playoff implemented NASCAR rulings things. And you'll notice I put the $75,000 fine for a punch in there. You know who just liked the post?
Tell me it was Ricky.
Yeah. Yes! I got the notification. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. liked your tweet. And so yeah, the whole tweet. It's funny because I sent out a tweet right after that talking about the positive things in NASCAR this year. And let's see how many likes that has. 1. Nobody cares. So yeah, the other one, and like I've told you, I don't put too much effort into Twitter because it's just a whole bunch of stuff. But Instagram has certainly been popping, and I will say, a lot of people have been texting me over the last 24 hours, like, man, like you were firing off a lot of stuff there, a lot of engagement here and there. And yeah, it's great. I mean, when you're a social media owner or brand owner, you want engagement, right? No matter which way you look at it, when you get insights and things to post about the sport and people chiming in and getting to interact with all the different people that are fans of NASCAR or just becoming fans, it's tremendous. But what I've told friends this year and have told other people is like, man, this year it just seems to be all the wrong ways, huh? Like it was a fun time when we had that crazy finish at Atlanta, 3 wide, right? When we have all these crazy finishes, getting to break those down, but nothing really sparks a nice social media rumbling like some controversy, some nice post-race playoff stuff. I think the Austin Dillon stuff was crazy, but this Martinsville night topped it. Last night topped it. I think we're doing record numbers for Motor Stardom as far as what last night was. I don't know which way to look at it day by day, but we did some record numbers for Insight last night. So I'm certainly I guess proud of that. Not proud of the sport, but proud of the page. And I gotta cover it the best I can. But nonetheless, yeah, Stenhouse likes or doesn't like the issues that have been going on in NASCAR. It seems like a lot of people have voiced their opinions and not been afraid to voice their opinions more. I mean, just by that Christopher Bell tweet, we'll pull it back up just for the hell of it. There it is. This could be a fine. They could fine him for that. You never know. But he said it vague enough to where maybe it won't be. Brad Keselowski came out, and I quoted that last night and put it up on the page where he said right after the race, this should be the end of the playoffs. Literally, he just came out flat out said it.
That's
And
a
I think
big.
enough drivers have enough podcasts these days. We know Denny Hamlin goes on his podcast and is like, yeah, screw all these guys, whatever. So it's a new era in NASCAR for sure. And I think my best advice to, my best hope for the off season is that, not that anybody would be listening to this. This is our test run on my secondary account. So shout out to the 2 people watching. This wasn't really supposed to go out to anybody, but thank you guys for tuning in.
We're
My
just a
my
couple
best
of bots.
was that
We're just a couple of bots here talking. So
we are a couple of bots, yeah. So my my best hope for the off season would just be they spend a long time, and it's not a long time, right? Season comes around the corner, but 3 months. I think 3 months is certainly enough time to get number one, the damn lawsuit sorted out. We need to get that sorted out because there's just too many things going on right now. We got the lawsuit going on. We need to get these rule changes figured out. We need to figure out what qualifying is going to look like for a full year. In my opinion, you can't change it mid-year. And in my opinion, I like what they're doing with the tires, right? When they introduce the soft and the hard, but we can't be doing that mid-year, right? Teams have notebooks. Teams are preparing for races. And if you want teams to prepare for races throughout the year, like you said, you want them to give you 100, right? You want them to take the sport seriously. Stop changing stuff mid-year. It's that simple. The safety things I get, right? You can look at and say, well, we should have known that to begin the year, which we should have, right? We should have these cars more time on the track. We shouldn't be learning things about the next gen car in 2024. I think that's completely ridiculous. But I'd rather them make the change than not make it. So that can be something totally separate. But just an off season to take a look at all these rule changes and listen to the fans or listen to the bots, listen to the people, listen to all areas here. Listen to the people that have watched the sport for 30 years. Listen to the people that have watched the sport for 20. Listen to the people that have watched the sport for 5. And listen to the people that have watched the sport for 5 weeks. Because in my experience and all the people that I have encountered and the audience that I'm able to reach, I've experienced all of them. And from what I can say is a lot of things that are going on this year to new viewers are confusing. And I think there's a step that fans take from being, okay, I know NASCAR. I'm going to go to a race. Yeah, that's cool. I sat in the stands, breathtaking experience. Anybody's going to say that. NASCAR is incredible. And whether you like it or not, you go to a race, you're going to have a great time. Step 2 is actually knowing what's going on the racetrack and trying to get invested and not going to the track and being like, okay, why is this going on? Oh, there's a playoffs, there's a point standings, and there's a stage. There's what the hell is qualifying? That shouldn't be happening. And so, in my opinion, yes, you want to make all these things to attract new viewers, and they might be interested at first, but you got to keep them there. You can't make it too complicated to where, I see all these new fans getting invested in the sport be like, what the hell is going on? Like,
remember the caution clock?
that was probably the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm glad we're not there, right? We're talking about the sport still being in a good sport in a good spot right now. That is when the sport was in a horrific spot. I mean, the fact that anybody came to a table in NASCAR headquarters and was like, I got a great idea. You know what I'm saying? The stages weren't enough, right? We're going to have a caution clock. That was probably one of the, if not the worst NASCAR ideas of all time.
It's right
And
overtime line.
yeah, the overtime line also is one of the stupidest things. If you're just compiling a list here of the top 5 dumbest ideas to ever come out of NASCAR HQ, those 2 certainly make the list. And I will say, like we've been talking about all this negative stuff, it's converted to a positive, as in we're not in those times anymore. And I think for people, because you'll see people, man, stop complaining, this, that. I think there's a difference between being a hater of the sport and complaining about it than being somebody that is really passionate about the sport and wants it to be the best it possibly can. Because I want to be able to simply explain the sport to my friends and family who, are not in tap with it. I literally was just, explaining today. People asking me, man, what the hell happened last night? And I'm like, oh gosh, well, where do I start? Right. And so, you're going to have those things in all sports, but I think we just want the sport to be the best it possibly can. And the reason why you get so passionate about it now is because the sport is in a good spot. Like we are in a good spot. Like I was explaining about the playoffs, we're in a great spot. NASCAR is in a great place. It could be better, right? The car could certainly be better. The racing could certainly be taken a little bit more seriously, but you know what? We're in a good spot. There's interest. We're getting good TV viewership this year. I think we're going to be up again in percent, which is what we want in today's world. I think ticket sales are looking perfectly fine. We're still selling out tracks. I think NASCAR is in a great spot economically. But we got to fix all the other things to get to our full potential. So it's like looking at yourself as a human being, right? You want to be better than you were yesterday. You know that you've done a lot of great things in your life as a human being, but you're never being true to yourself if you don't want to be better. If you can't find a weakness to work on. So I think NASCAR should be the same exact way and not ignore the issues, right? When Elton Sawyer goes up there, and all respect to him for, addressing the media after every one of those controversies. Like I do appreciate them doing that and being open. But when he goes up there and just says, yeah, everything's fine, playoffs are great, fans love it, we're chilling. I don't like that because you're not, in your head, you are lying through your teeth. And there are things that you have to improve. And you can say that without saying the sport sucks. None of us are in here saying NASCAR freaking stinks. I'm done. I'm moving to the NFL. Nobody's saying that. But we're just hoping it can be the best it can possibly be. And I mean, shoot, we're already through the season. I mean, Chris, we're at our final race of the year already. We are 35. If you count every race, we're 37 races in, right? If you count the All-Star race and the Clash, this is going to be race 38 of the year already after, the Daytona 500 weekend, which still feels like yesterday. But man, what do you make of this season? Who do you got in the Final Four? I mean, we got Tyler Reddick, we got Joey Logano, we got Ryan Blaney, and William Byron as of right now. Don't think that's going to change, but you never know. But as of right now, those are the picks. I'll keep it short and sweet. I got to stick with my boy Tyler Reddick because I picked him at the beginning of the playoffs, so I can't change it. But even if I were to, honestly, who's got the most momentum right now? Ryan Blaney. But I'm still going with Tyler Reddick. How about you?
I think it's going to be Joey Logano. And the reason I say that is because we've seen this situation before where Logano
going to be too.
He wins at the beginning of the round to get himself in, and then he's a little low key for the next couple races because they're literally only thinking about Phoenix for those next couple of races. We've seen them in this spot. They convert. They get the job done. It's always a little bit of a gut feeling for me when it comes to picks. But Joey's done this twice before. Ryan is the defending champ. But he's also a guy. It's like I don't know. I'm not saying he can't. He certainly can. He did last year. But I like play with the words in my head. Ryan Blaney back-to-back champion. And it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's how it's going to play out. It doesn't vibe. I would love it. I love Ryan Blaney. He's probably the one I'm rooting for as a fan. But yeah, I just really like Joey in this spot, and I like their team. I think they're the most prepared for this, and I think they are the ones I least expect to make a costly mistake.
I would have to agree. Kind of like we were talking about before. I think Penske has some of the most reliable crew chiefs in the business. They seem to always be able to get a car ready when you need it. I mean, you talk about you want to compare racing to sports. I think Penske's the clutchest organization in NASCAR. The fact that Hendrick was so dominant this year, the best team in the series, and they almost had no cars in the final four is absolutely crazy. And almost the same for Joe Gibbs Racing too, almost, Um, or no, it is. Yeah, no
Yeah,
Joe
no,
Gibbs
it is.
Racing. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It could have swayed either way. It could have been Hendrick or Gibbs, but it is Gibbs without four cars in the final four, which is something crazy for sure. But I think you look at Penske and they just get it done at the right times. And I've certainly, if I'm swinging with momentum, I would go Blaney. If I'm going with just like conscience, it's almost like betting against, Tom Brady's Bucks against the playoffs. It was like, well, they didn't really look good all year, but I feel like they're probably just going to come through here. I can't bet against them. So that's how I would feel about Joey Logano. But I'm still riding with Tyler Reddick. I think he's going to be the guy. And you know what usually happens when we have three guys that we talk about in the final four? William Byron's just going to go win the championship. So I don't know. I think all four drivers have a chance. If there's anything you've learned from this year, anybody has a chance. I mean, we don't know. Somebody could unload at Phoenix and suck. I mean, that's just a reality of the next gen car. Joey Logano could unload and they could run 25th. But I don't believe they will. I think they'll be ready. I think they sandbagged Homestead for sure. Didn't try a lot at Martinsville. Same with Tyler Reddick. They talk about the format wanting to give everybody to give 100% every race. I'm like, did Tyler Reddick and his team really try for Martinsville? Did they? They had their worst run of the season and then blew up in the second half of the race. Like, no, they did not. And Joey Logano sandbagged Homestead. That's a fact. But I think it's going to be interesting. I think it'll be a good race. Hopefully the second to last championship race we see at Phoenix. Reasonably so. Hopefully last year will be the last championship race at Phoenix. And then where it'll come back to, Chris. Hopefully in 2026, it will come back home to the Sunshine State. Hopefully in Homestead, Miami, Florida. So they're the city's working on that right now. And hopefully, as you see next year, Homestead will be in March of 2025. That wasn't just a move that was just done because of it. Homestead's going to want time to, if they need to if NASCAR says you got to do A, B, and C, make some renovations, add some stuff to the track, they're going to have plenty of time to do it before 2026, before we come back for championship weekend. So hopefully that is the case. So then I will be able to attend championship weekend again as a man that doesn't really make money in the sport yet. So it's much easier to go to Florida than it is to Phoenix, I will say.
Yeah.
But certainly it's going to be a fun weekend. It's been another crazy NASCAR season. Thankful for all the opportunities that we have been provided. Being at the racetrack is always a blessing, as you know, Chris. Got a shout out on the show, all of our sponsors, which is nobody. So the shout out's over. But hopefully we will get some sponsorship rolling soon. As I've kind of hinted at on the page, our goal is, to continue to build something here over this off season with Motor Stardom. And my goal, just always as a human being, but now for us as a brand, is to build something you've never seen before, and to build something creative to where you can, when you're looking for something that you don't have a bunch of options right now. You got to come to Motor Stardom to see something that we have created, and hopefully it will, exceed expectations that we have. And we're going to see kind of unfold what all of that will look like in the off season. So it's going to be very fun to figure that out. And any final remarks from you, Chris, before we head off the somewhat air here? I guess you can watch people can watch replays on my secondary YouTube, but
true. Just in case I actually pick all three at Phoenix, I'm just going to get it on the record. Custer and Eckes.
That's right. Ooh.
I just want that on tape.
Trucks. I think I'm going with Allgaier this year. I think it's his year. I think he wins the Xfinity title. And I gotta go with my boy Corey Heim. I think Corey Heim has got to get that Truck Series championship this year, because if I had to make a prediction, I don't think Taylor Gray lets Eckes win that championship. But I don't think Tricon lets him win it. But I think it's Corey Heim's year. He is that dude. He is that guy. He should have won it last year if it wasn't for a certain someone, real tall guy in the garage. But I think I'm going Heim. I'm going Allgaier. I'm going Reddick. Those would be my three.
Sounds good. We'll see what happens.
We will. So any final remarks before we head off the air here, Chris?
No, I think that about covers it on my end.
All right. So thank you guys as I will roll in the slow music here as we finish up what is, I guess, not the debut episode, but the test episode. Hopefully we will debut it sometime over the off season. We'll have, a lot of great guests come on the show. Hopefully a nice live show for everybody to tune in. It will probably be exclusive on the Motor Stardom page on the Instagram, as well as hopefully some other outlets. So it's going to be, everybody enjoy the finale at Phoenix. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you guys when we see you.